I give the floor to the Russian Federation.
Thank you, President. We welcome the High Representative of the EU for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Mr. Josep Borrell, and we listen very carefully to your assessments. We are in favour of developing cooperation between the UN and regional and sub-regional organisations on the basis of the UN Charter, first and foremost, its Chapter 8. Cooperation with the EU is no exception. It should also be organised around this basis and within the framework of UN General Assembly Resolution 65276 from 2011. We also believe that regional structures should complement UN efforts in their area of responsibility and within their mandate. Thus, amongst the priorities for cooperation between the UN and the EU, we see primarily the collective cooperation to counter cross-border threats and challenges, as well as fostering dialogue on counter-terrorism. This kind of cooperation has a significant potential, and we fully support this kind of scenario. At the same time, however, it is vitally important that cooperation between the UN and the EU lead to strengthening multilateral approaches to global affairs and not to erode or revise them. True multilateralism entails consistent support of the central role of the UN. Promoting dubious concepts like the rules-based order or imposing bloc approaches and attempts to present one's own experience and achievements as a gold standard, which other countries should implement back at home, bears no resemblance to multilateralism and often leads to blatant interference in the affairs of other states. We would warn against these steps, for example, to be taken concerning Belarus. President, Russia-EU relations are currently, unfortunately, at the lowest ebb in history. This is a separate topic and not the topic of our meeting today. But I must say that our European partners are more often, rather than a careful and patient collective work to seek compromise and constructive solutions with partners within the General Assembly and Security Council, instead are choosing a destructive unilateral approach. This gives rise to nothing but the gravest of concern. The most obvious example of this line that's been taken, actively developing and then arbitrarily applying illegal unilateral coercive measures by the EU, approved in circumvention of the UN Security Council and of international legal norms. Rather than official statements on the targeted nature of these mechanisms, in fact, their unlawful nature substantially hinders the social economic situation in affected countries and leads to a fall in standard of living for ordinary people. This has been confirmed by relevant assessments by UN officials. Again, we draw Brussels' attention to the fact that this practice does not lead to a change in states' policy. On the contrary, it leans towards neo-colonialism and leads also affected states and all right-minded countries to unite to defend the interests of their own peoples and the basic principles of interstate cooperation, as enshrined in the UN Charter. Even in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, the EU did not heed the call of the UN Secretary-General, Guterres, to suspend unilateral coercive measures for humanitarian purposes. This indifference does nothing for these indifference to human suffering does nothing for the EU's honour at the international stage. The EU is an important regional player, and its assistance to the UN is necessary. However, the efforts taken by the EU should not go beyond the frameworks handed down by Security Council mandates. In this context, we still have questions regarding the naval operation Irini in the Mediterranean, as one of the objectives of this is to assist in the fulfillment of the UN arms embargo on Libya. We call on the EU to tread very carefully in this region, which still cannot recover from the forcible destruction of the Libyan state 10 years ago, and a series of EU members were directly involved in this. We have great expectations from the EU as a mediator in the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue, even more so given the fact that the UN General Assembly gave the EU a special mandate to this end. So far, we must state that we have seen no significant results. In this connection, we would recommend to our European colleagues, rather than playing up to Pristina, to ensure that Pristina fulfills already agreed parameters, including creating, finally, a community of Serbian municipalities in Kosovo. Once again, we call on the EU to not deviate from the principle of impartiality during their mediations at these negotiations. The same wish also applies to the EU's policy in the Balkans as a whole. We'd call our colleagues to careful in their approach to universal decisions achieved within the EU, or ignoring or selectively reading them, and this could run the risk of undermining legitimacy of a whole host of structures in the region. Finally, we'd note the ever more frequent attempts of our colleagues from the EU with various means, promote in UN documents their own approaches on gender, human rights, climate, and other topics, presenting them as allegedly universal and benefiting from consensus. There are more and more examples of this. I'd like to caution immediately, we intend to more adamantly and uncompromisingly fight against this practice, reflecting the efforts of the US to replace international law with this so-called rules-based order. President, I would want to, after my statement, to have the impression that Russia has a negative attitude to the EU. This is not the case. We are neighbours on a context, and we're interested in cooperating and on ideologies and a dialogue. However, this should be built on equal footing and mutual respect. We have many questions to the EU that have accrued over recent years, but we ask them with a focus on specific facts. I'd like also the EU to do the same and not promote fake news and arbitrary accusations along the lines of highly likely. The EU can and should play a constructive role in Europe and around the world. We see here significant potential. Inter alia, we highly value the role of the EU as a coordinator for the JCPOA Commission. There are also other areas where there is successful cooperation. The main point is that the EU understands that in the modern world there is no place for hegemony and dominance. In the EU, there are so many people who recognize the counterproductive nature of confrontational approach of our countries, and also the erroneous line which has been held in regions in our neighbourhood over recent years. A culmination of this was the anti-constitutional state coup in Ukraine, as well as Russophobia, neo-Nazism, and xenophobia in that country. We trust that common sense will prevail at the end of the day, and we'll be able to select a new balanced model for our relationship, with a focus on the principle of international law. This equal and honest cooperation is something that Russia has always been ready to engage in. We trust that our European colleagues will be able to make the right choice and overcome the many unfortunate trends that I've mentioned. The EU stands to gain from this, as would its international partners, including, of course, Russia and the UN, member states of which are interested in developing a constructive and effective type of cooperation with the EU, alongside other regional and sub-regional organizations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.